The bill shook like a leaf in a furnace wind, and the town held its breath to see if a single dollar could buy back a piece of a broken world. Milbrook's square baked beneath a high, pitiless sun. White heat rippled over tin roofs, and the hitch rails threw long, wavering shadows that looked like gallows laid on their sides. The smell was a hard blend of hoarse, hot iron, and the day-old sour of spilled beer from the saloon porch where flies stitched lazy circles through the light. A dog lay under a freight wagon with one eye open, as if even the animals knew when men were up to something foul. On the platform, hammered together from crib-mined timber, stood a girl. 19, maybe, barefoot, ankle scabbed, a cotton dress torn at the hem. The marks across her wrists were fresh and honest, like truth written in iron. But her eyes, dark as creek water under sycamore shade, held fast, refusing to learn the lesson cruelty kept trying to teach. 50 to start, called Silas Gentry, the auction man, slicker than lamp oil, hat brim pinched mean as a beak. Prime field hand, sound as a dollar eagle. A murmur rolled across the square, low and ugly. Ezra Whitmore reined in at the edge of the crowd, the leather creaking under his weight. Grain dust still clung to his duster from the morning mill run. 62, with a hard coat of miles on his bones and a beard the wind had salted gray, he'd come for flour and salt pork, maybe a tall cup of coffee that didn't taste like boiled wagon rope. Instead, he'd found this, a market that men swore the war had ended, running bold as a church picnic at noon. 70, then 75. The numbers hit Ezra's ears like pistol shots. Somewhere in his ribs a door he kept nailed shut rattled on its hinges. A small room with a smaller bed where a fever had stolen his daughter's breath 3 winters back. Sarah had been 19 too, stubborn as a mule about living. Those eyes, Lord help him, he was looking at them again. 75 and a dime, someone laughed. Ezra felt the dollar in his hand before he knew why. Paper thin as a promise. He lifted it, and the shake in his fingers made the bill hiss against the light breeze. 1, he said. The square stopped breathing. Then the snorts came, the short, barking kind that leaves spittle at the mouth's corner. A man near the smithy spat and missed his own boot. Gentry blinked, slow, then smiled the way a snake smiles when it's deciding which angle to take its bite. Did you say $1, stranger? The laugh lines around Gentry's eyes were cut with knives. This ain't a mule with a bum pastern. This is property. Ezra's jaw set like stone left out through the winter. You heard me. The girl turned her head. Not hope, not yet. Something smaller and harder. The recognition you give a fellow traveler when both of you have been walking in the same cold all your lives. Well now, said another voice, smooth as a polished coffin lid. Seems a bid's a bid. The crowd parted around a badge that meant less than dust. Marshall Boone, milky eyes that never warmed, handsome in a brittle way, a silk cravat gone the color of old teeth, strolled up with 3 men behind him who carried their pistols like they were part of the hand God gave them. We honor commerce in Milbrook, Boone went on, showing his teeth in what some might call a smile if they'd never seen a wolf. He tipped his hat toward Ezra, as if doffing it to a grave. Let's see what our guest does with his purchase. Gentry's hammer fell. The crack hopped off false fronts and flew down side streets till it had nowhere left to go. Sold for $1 American. The chain came loose with a clatter that sounded too loud, like iron learned the trick of speaking. Ezra stepped up through the heat mirage, every eye on him, and the platform boards moaned. He pressed the bill to Gentry's palm and took the key with a nod. When he turned to the girl, he found her looking straight through him, the way you look through a stage curtain right before a play you don't care to be in. Name's Ezra Whitmore, he said, and he kept his voice low enough to belong to just the two of them. Let's get these off. Keturah, she answered, voice even, vowels fine-edged with schooling that didn't match the raw rope at her wrists. Keturah, Washington. He swallowed. The world ticked once, twice. He turned the key. The first shackle let go, then the second, and blood rose in 2 tired crescents on her skin. Come on, he whispered. North Road. There's willows past the livery, then open country. Take the mare, ride the river bank till the cottonwood's thin. 20 miles and you're smoke. You don't understand, she said, not moving, not blinking against the sun. Her mouth tilted, not a smile. The look you give a man who still believes the door is unlocked because the handle turns. You think they'll let you walk away with their theater? From the back of the square came the drum of hooves, the sound of trouble arriving punctual. Ezra didn't need to turn to know the cadence. 3 horses, one heavy as sin. He looked anyway. Boone first, of course, stepping down dainty as a parlor dancer, dust daring to land on his boots and dying for it. Then 2 of the men who did his deciding for him, and a 3rd rider who made the light seem to curdle. Iron Teeth McGrath, 6 foot and then some, shoulders like the cross timbers of mine, a face scored with 3 slashes that had never learned to heal, and a grin that flashed 2 little knives where canines ought to be. He looked at people like a farrier looks at hooves. All utility, no music. We got us a mix-up, Boone drawled. That girl spoken for. Has been, a good while now. Iron Teeth rode near 200 miles to fetch what's his by contract. Lawful property, McGrath put in, his voice like a shovel hitting stone. Paper signed, paper sealed, paper paid. Ezra felt the shape of the trap then, neat as joinery. The auction had been sugar on a rotten apple, a show to keep decent folks quiet and indecent ones busy counting. He'd walked onto the stage with his hat still on and asked where to sit. What's a paper to a soul? He said, but quiet, because some truths are for hillsides and some are only for the space a breath takes. McGrath looked past him at Keturah. Come along now, he said, a schoolmarm tone on a gallows rope. No sense in making this clever. Keturah didn't move. The wind shifted and lifted a dark curl from her forehead. She let it fall back and gave the bounty man the kind of look the winter sky gives a raven. I see you. I have seen you before. You do not own the cold. Boone rested a hand on his holster the way a Baptist rests a hand on a Bible he doesn't read. You can take your dollar, stranger, he said to Ezra, gentle as poison. We'll call it a misunderstanding among friends. Ezra thought of Sarah then, as if grief were a second heart that had learned to beat between the beats of the first. He saw the fever sheen on her brow. He heard the last thing she'd said before the fever took the words away. Pa, don't let the bad men win because you're tired. He had been tired ever since. Tired enough to live quiet, to mind his store, to nod at neighbors who drank their kindness watered. But some tired wakes a man right up. What if I say no? He asked. McGrath's steel grin widened. Then I get paid to enjoy my work. It might have broken right there, hot and fast, all iron and screaming. But the world has a way of making room for worse. From the east road came another rhythm of hooves, tighter, drilled, the kind you hear when men learn to move the same way together. Bluecoats, Union cavalry. Ezra's breath caught, then snagged hard, because something about them didn't match the songs. Uniforms too clean, eyes too cold, lines too straight in a land that bends everything it touches. Captain Thorne, Boone murmured, and there was real fear in a voice that didn't hold room for much else. You said your patrol was riding south. Thorne swung down, lean and arrow-built, hair gone gray too early, eyes like shaved ice behind a wire smile. He measured the square the way a surveyor measures a river, not for beauty, for use. Marshal, he said, looks like you've gathered the whole of Milbrook's virtue in one tidy knot. His gaze slid to Keturah and fixed. Miss Washington, your father's very keen to recover you. Ezra saw the ripple that moved through her shoulders. Not fear, recognition, and the kind that hurts. She lifted her chin. My father's dead, she said. Thorne's smile thinned to a thread. Then it's his employers who worry. This territory breeds accidents. McGrath shifted in the saddle, a slow storm building. Army's got no say in my contract. Thorne didn't look at him. Papers can be made. Unmade. The nation has interests larger than your appetites, Mr. McGrath. The square drew tight as a cinch pulled on a skittish bronc. Ezra felt the decision build in him, layer by layer, like a man stacking rails for a fence he knows the wind will test. Choices complain in the West. Step forward or step aside. He stepped. The girl stays with me, he said. It wasn't loud, but it carried, and the way it carried made even Boone shift his boots for a better balance. Ezra moved half a pace, putting his shoulder between Keturah and the 3 rings of wolves that had circled her. The heat pressed down like a hand on the crown of his hat. Dust ran its tongue across his teeth. Thorne studied him the way men study a map they don't care to follow. "You have no idea what you're walking into, Mr. Whitmore. Mr. Whitmore. These waters run to a different sea. Higher offices, deeper pockets, provisions made to keep the country stitched where it tears. Always the same needle," Ezra said. "Always the same thread." Keturah's fingers touched the back of his coat. Not a clutch. A pressure, like a bell tapped with the softest part of the hand, to test if it rings true. She tilted her head, eyes never leaving Thorne. "What will it be, Captain?" she asked. "Lawful arrest or unlawful purchase?" Thorne's mouth tilted in what might pass for humor if you'd never seen the real kind. "Whichever keeps the peace, Miss Washington." "You mean," Ezra said, "whichever keeps you sleeping at night." McGrath moved first. Men like him don't abide long speeches. His gun came up smooth as a snake easing out of a cool rock crack. Ezra twisted, felt the heat of lead pass his cheek like summer breath, and the square exploded. Sound is a thing you can hold in your hands when pistols talk this close, thick, heavy, shaking the bones at the hinge. People scattered. The dog bolted. A window on the 2nd story of the hotel burst into splinters and made a little snow of light in the sun. Down, Ezra hissed to Keturah, and she dropped behind his horse. Every inch a soldier's daughter, whether she claimed it or not. Boone's men fanned wide. Thorne's troopers drew lines with their bodies the way surveyors draw lines with ink, calm and cold. McGrath flowed to cover behind a wagon wheel rim charred from some long ago branding fire. Gentry dove headfirst off the platform like a man who finally remembered he had a soul and didn't want to know what it would cost. And in that ragged second, while the world shook itself out into sides, Ezra saw something skitter from a saddlebag ripped open in the chaos. A leather folio, corner stamped with an eagle seal dulled by sweat and travel. Keturah's eyes cut to it, then to him. He watched the sum of her life add itself up behind those eyes. A father, a ledger, names that could topple men who'd never toppled for anything but whiskey. "Don't," he started, but the word was a river, and she was already over it. Low, fast, sure-footed. Bullets stirred dust an inch from her calf. The air whined with failure that barely missed. She slid behind the wreck of a hay rake and stretched, fingertips grazing leather. McGrath raised his pistol for the easy shot, and Ezra went at him like a man who'd finally decided tired wasn't enough reason to live small. They hit the ground together behind the wagon, and the impact blew dust up in a puff that smelled like old wheat and rat. McGrath was stronger. Ezra had rage. They traded both like cards in a backroom game. "Should have kept your dollar," McGrath grunted, steel teeth flashing once, twice, close enough Ezra could see the file marks. "Reckon I did," Ezra said through clenched teeth. "Spent something else." Across the square, Keturah came up with the folio, and in the hard sun the seals winked like coins on a riverbed. Thorne's gaze snapped to it. For a heartbeat his face, so carefully made, so exact, cracked, and Ezra saw what lived under. Not duty. Not country. Fear, the kind that knows names and dates, and how close the noose fits once your turn. "Miss Washington," Thorne called, voice flat as a board laid over a grave. "Hand those documents to me, and I will see you on a train by nightfall." Keturah stood, small and unbreakable, dust on her hems like a benediction. "Captain," she said, "you will see me in court." The square went very quiet inside the noise, the way a man goes very still inside his own heartbeat when he decides he'd rather die standing than live bent. Ezra heard his daughter again, plain as the creak of a house that keeps you company after the world empties out. "Pa, don't let the bad men win because you're tired." He didn't feel tired anymore. He wrenched McGrath's wrist, felt the gun skid loose, and came up on one knee with his own Colt drawn steady as a fence post sunk in spring mud. "The girl stays," he said. "The papers stay." Boone's smile died first. Thorne's eyes narrowed to winter. And somewhere at the edge of the square, a train whistle cried from 10 miles out, thin and lonesome, like the world announcing that time was moving whether Milbrook learned anything or not. The wind picked up and carried the smell of rain from a sky that didn't look wet. Dust rose and settled on shoulders and hats, and the folio that gleamed like a small, hard sun in Ketura's hands. Somewhere a church bell rang the hour no one cared to count, and the West, as it often does, held its breath to see what a single man and a single dollar might be worth. Some paper cuts deeper than knives, and some names weigh more than bullets. Gunfire stitched the square into ragged seams. Ezra moved like a man building a fence in a storm, one brace at a time, never mind the lightning. He kept his Colt low, elbows in, firing only when the iron front sight found a hat brim or a shoulder through the dust. Each report slapped the air and came back from the false fronts as if the town itself were speaking hard truths. Keturah slid beside him behind the freighting wagon, the leather folio clamped in both hands like a psalter saved from a church fire. Her breath came measured, not panicked, as if someone had taught her long ago that panic is just fear that forgot its manners. Close up, Ezra saw the intelligence in her eyes at war with grief, a room full of ledgers and a street full of blood occupying the same small heart. "Tell me plain," he said, eyes on Thorne's troopers as they fanned left. "What's in that book worth dying for?" "Everything men think they buried," she answered. "Contracts marked clean that ain't clean. Guns sold that were supposed to be scrap. Judges bought, juries bent. Names written by careful hands that never thought a candle would hold this long. Your father's hand." She dipped her chin once. "He kept the accounts for men who called themselves patriots. Thought ledger lines could steer wolves. When he tried to turn the book on them, Captain Thorne wrote the last line in lead. A bullet chewed the wagon board a handspan from Ezra's head, spraying splinters that stung like hornets. He flinched, blinked dust. "Then this is the scaffold they built for themselves." "It is," she said, "and we're standing on it." Across the square, Marshal Boone waded forward, as if the gunfire were rain sprinkled for his enjoyment. He worked his pistol with a gambler's easy wrist, picking at angles and expressions, choosing fear the way a cook chooses salt. "Mr. Whitmore," he called, sing-song as a schoolyard taunt. "You're old enough to know when to fold. Hand me the lady and the papers. I'll be gentle before I ain't." Thorne didn't waste breath on theater. He signaled with 2 fingers, and his line of blue pivoted with drill-yard neatness. One squad kneeling, one standing, rifles lifting as one. Ezra felt the weight of that machine draw a line across the square like a chalk mark where heads ought to fall. He leaned close to Keturah. "You run on my mark," he said. "North alley, past the livery. There's a cut to the river where the willows hide the trail." "I don't leave these," she said, clutching the folio tighter. "You ain't leaving them. You're delivering them. That's different." Her eyes flicked to him, a fast, flinty assessment. "You ain't afraid of dying?" "No, ma'am," he said, checking the cylinder with a thumbnail. "Just of dying forgotten." He threw a glance over his shoulder, caught a flash of movement. The dog from under the freight wagon streaking for safety, and above it the pale flutter of telegraph wire zigzagging away to the east, a spider's thread pulled tight to far-off minds that might not be crooked. Maybe, if a message could run the gauntlet of men who killed messages for a living. "On me," he breathed. He rose in a blur, fired 2, 3 shots that found wood and iron and made men duck. Keturah bolted low and quick, skirts skimming dust, the folio pressed flat against her stomach. Ezra moved with her, firing where the space opened, a shepherd with a loud stick. The 2 of them crossed the first open yard, then another, and then the world closed its fist. Boone's deputy lunged from a doorway and caught Keturah's arm, iron fingers biting. She pivoted, heel down, and drove the edge of the folio into his wrist like a carpenter's strike with a square. Bone thumped. The man yowled and let go. Ezra put a round into the doorframe 6 inches from the fellow's ear and found the insult satisfied him more than killing would have. They slid into the alley shade. It smelled of harness oil, lye, old onion soup. Light striped the dirt in long bars between buildings, the jail's bricks still damp, where someone had sluiced the night filth off its stoop. In a long, thin distance, the river's cottonwoods shivered like a promise made under oath. Left, Ezra said, voice low. They cleared a stack of crates and almost ran into a shadow that detached from a wall. Iron Teeth came out of the dark like a boulder rolling out of bad ground, his big hand closing on Ezra's coat and tossing him sideways into a heap of barrel staves. Payne shot white through Ezra's shoulder and turned his arm to rope. McGrath's other hand tied in Ketura's hair, hard enough to make her gasp. Paper, McGrath said, breath hot with the work he loved. Now, Keturah stilled, and Ezra saw something ancient slide behind her eyes, not surrender. The cold arithmetic people learn when they've watched rooms full of men barter other people's futures for fun. She loosened her grip on the folio a fraction, let the leather slip, just enough to make McGrath's gaze drop. Ezra drove his boot heel into the shin of Iron Teeth's planted leg. Bone met bone with a satisfying thunk. McGrath hissed and swung. Ezra ducked, and the blow cut air where his head had been. For a second, the alley rang with nothing but breath. Then a voice came thin through the morning and stretched taut as a violin string. Hold! Captain Thorne had come to the mouth of the alley with 3 troopers at his back. His pistol rode low, precise, the weapon of a man who had taught other men to shoot, so they'd die at the right time, in the right formation, and not before. Let go, McGrath, Thorne said without warmth. She's mine. McGrath's steel canines flashed. You ain't got a writ on that, he said, tightening his grip on Keturah's hair. I got a purchase. I have a nation, Thorne replied, and even the flies seemed to stand still. Keturah's lips pressed thin. A nation or your ledger? She asked. Thorne's eyes cut a slow inch to Ezra. One last time, Mr. Whitmore. Hand me the book. Walk away. Let the army handle its vermin. And trust a badge that eats what it swore to guard. Ezra said, No, sir. McGrath's fingers slid from hair to throat. The alley narrowed to the width of his fist. Ezra saw pink at the edge of Keturah's lip, a small flower crushed under a big boot. Some debts, McGrath said, steel teeth clicking together, get paid in screaming. He lifted Keturah off her feet with that one hand. Ezra did not remember raising his Colt. He remembered the sun glancing off the barrel the way it used to glance off Sarah's hair when she laughed with a mouth full of summer apples. He remembered a prayer he hadn't said since the night the fever broke him. God, make my hand straight. He remembered the sound a hammer makes when it cocks on the last sure round a gun has. He put one clean through McGrath's wrist. The bounty man screamed, a raw, surprised animal noise, and dropped both woman and pistol. Steel teeth clacked on reflex. The shot ricocheted off brick and smacked the jail's bell, which rang a single stun note. Keturah hit the dirt on her knees and rolled. Folio locked her chest. Take him, Thorne snapped, and Boone's men and Thorne's men surged at once, tripping over one another's eagerness like dogs on a single bone. Ezra threw a shoulder into a deputy, shoved Keturah past the water trough, and they burst out of the alley into a thin slice of daylight where the North Road began its pale run through willows. They made the livery as 2 startled bay geldings lifted heads like questions. Ezra cut a lead rope with his pocket knife, swung to his saddle before the horse knew it had been invited, and reached down with his good arm. Up, he said. Keturah hesitated half a breath. You sure? This is me sure. She took his wrist, light and strong, and came up behind him, knees snug at the skirts, folio wedged into the small of his back. Ezra touched heels, and the geldings surged, barn light to summer sun to the white heat of the road in 3 heartbeats. Behind them, the alley vomited uniforms and hats in rage. The willow shade covered them for a creek's length, dapple light painting their backs with coin spots that slid and stuck and slid again. Then the river's breath fell away, and they were out under the empty bowl of the day, the cottonwoods smaller, the wind stiffer, the telegraph lines fencing the world in their black lace shadow. Hooves drummed a message older than wires. Go, go, go. Old mining trail, Keturah said against his shoulder, pointing with the hand that wasn't holding on. Cuts to the ridge. They can't bring numbers there. Ezra nodded and angled the gelding upslope toward a cut the color of old blood. Raw rock showed its ribs and ledges and shelves, and the trail smelled like dynamite long blown and mules long dead. Behind, the pursuit fanned and faltered, then consolidated when Thorne's voice carried. "Stay tight, climb steady, keep the girl in sight." "Your father," Ezra said, breath measured for the climb. "You said he tried to turn on them." "He kept duplicates," she answered. "Scattered in places men forget when they drink power neat. Names: judges, railroad men, mine captains with armies in their pockets, marshals who traded law for favors and called it order." The trail narrowed. Their gelding's iron shoe struck sparks that fell and died quick in the dust. To the left, the drop ran down forever through scrub and sun-glared stones to a river the color of tarnished coin. To the right, mesquite and thorn through interlocked shadows like jail bars on bare rock. "Why'd you take the folio to Milbrook?" Ezra asked. "Telegraph office is east." "I was meeting a man who said he knew an honest judge," she said, a breath catching on something that might have been laughter once and wasn't anymore. Turns out honesty got lost on the way. They topped the ridge and the world changed. On the far side stood the weathered ribs of an abandoned copper mine. The office slumped, the hoist house listing, the main shaft wearing a black mouth like a sermon swallowed wrong. Telegraph wires ran past the place without so much as a glance, and the road split. One forked to Millfield, a wafer-thin town smudged into the valley with its telegraph pole pricking the sky. The other sliding into scrub, where men had pulled a mountain's guts out for 10 good years and left the bones for coyotes in memory. "There," Ezra said. "We make a stand. We make it where the ground remembers how to swallow men." Inside the hoist house, air tasted of rust and bat musk. Ezra dismounted, every joint speaking like a board that's carried weight too long. They found rifles wrapped in oiled cloth under tarps that had learned 100 summers how to keep secrets. Boxes of cartridges heavy enough to tilt a man's shoulders. Ezra whistled low. "Millfield Mining Consortium had themselves a private war," he said. "Must have been expecting Comanche ghosts. Or miners who wanted fair pay," Keturah said, dry as alkali. "They set rifles in windows with broken glass teeth. They stacked cartridges within reach. They said nothing they didn't need to say while their hands learned what to do without permission." Outside, Thorne's men spread in a crescent, careful now, remembering the first hour's lesson. Boone's surviving deputies slunk along the edges like rats robbing a granary while the cat sleeps. McGrath's cursing carried, tinny with blood and affronted pride. "Miss Washington," Thorne's voice came flat across the rocks. "Parley, talk from where you stand," she called back. "We hear you fine. You're cornered. There are more of us than those old rifles can bury. I've seen plenty of rich men miscount," she said. "Always the last column ruins their day." Ezra gave her a slant smile. "You talk like a Whitmore." "I talk like a Washington," she said. A shadow crossed her face. "My father would have liked you." "That make us kin?" he asked. "By choice, not blood," she said. Thorne's first probe came quiet. 2 troopers slipping through scrub, soft-footed, patient. Ezra let them come until he could hear the rasp of cloth on rock, then touched off 2 shots that made clean work. He didn't look when they fell. The West writes certain paragraphs the same way every time. The second probe came hot, rifles barking, bullets scalping the hoist house roof so the dust fell like tired snow. Keturah answered from the office window with disciplined pairs, each shot measured like a ledger line. Men flinched, men fell. Men crawled back and learned to respect arithmetic. "They'll bring more," Ezra said. "They always do," she said. He glanced at the folio where it sat on a crate, the eagle seal dulled by years of other men's hands. "What if we don't live to carry it?" he asked. The words tasted like copper. Keturah looked at the black mouth of the main shaft. "Then we bury it where they buried their guns," she said, "and we leave a map with a man who still recognizes his own name when he says it under oath." "Telegraph," Ezra said, mind jumping to a line like a horse who sees the gap in a fence. If we can reach the wire, send a name that means something to someone unbought. Who? She asked. Ezra thought of a boy he'd once held by the scruff to keep him from a flash flood. The boy had grown into a man with shoulders squared by higher halls. Lieutenant Samuel Rollins, now a foreman at Millfield's mine, with a knack for breaking fights before they broke men. I got a friend, Ezra said, knows which end of shovel to hold and which end of the truth. Then we write fast, she said. They tore a ledger page from an old time book in the office. Names and tally marks from 1866 pacing in faded pencil across the top, and on its clean margin Ezra scrawled, to any honest federal authority. Captain W. Thorne of the 3rd Provisional Cavalry runs an extra-legal ring for sale of surplus arms, labor, and justice. Judge H. Morrison, Territory Circuit bought. Evidence in hand. Send legitimate troops. Protect witness Keturah, Washington. Ezra Whitmore, Milbrook, Millfield Grain. He added the one other name that might pierce the fog of crony ears, to Major Elias Carter, Department of the Platte. Carter had once slept in Ezra's hayloft when a green war chewed up boys and spat out men. Maybe he'd remember the hay's sweet smell and the bread Sarah's mother had slipped him. Now we just have to throw it on a wire that ain't owned, Ezra said. Owned wires cross this whole country, Keturah replied. We make them carry something honest for once. The next assault came at twilight, when men think shadows make them invisible. The sky went bruised plum, telegraph lines scribbling black calligraphy between a red coin of sun and a thin hard moon. The first shots strode the hoist house with dirty light. Ezra and Keturah answered, not frantic, not proud, just stubborn. Somewhere a trooper screamed thin like a hare caught in a snare. Somewhere Boone cursed and called men cowards who had learned that living is another way to be brave. When night finally took the ridge, the wind shifted cold. The mine timbers creaked like old hymns. Coyotes tuned their hunger in the gulch. Ezra let his back find a wall for a count of 5, then pushed off it before his bones got any ideas about rest. You said telegraph, Keturah whispered. I can make the wire if I crawl the north slope. They won't see my shadow there. Ezra shook his head. I go. You shoot straighter, she said. I think faster. He started to object, but she laid a hand on his sleeve, and the little pressure carried a logic bigger than his protest. I know the cipher my father used, she added. So if Thorne's men sniff the office, they read whether where there's fire. Don't you leave me talking to myself, Ezra said. Only a fool leaves a ledger unfinished, she said. She slid into the dark without another word. The right way to leave a man, when leaving him, is the best way to keep him. Ezra counted to 20 with the slow patience of a farmer waiting on rain. He moved to the office window and watched the lower slope where blue coats hunched over little cook fires like penitent monks. Thorne stood apart, a straight line under a bent sky, speaking low to a runner who thought he held his back straight and didn't quite. Minutes stretched taut. Then, like a moth that learned letters, the telegraph office down in Millfield began to tick. Ezra couldn't hear the words, but he knew what words sound like when they've waited too long to be said. A moment later, a shape detached from the shadow at the hoist house corner. Keturah slid back in through the side door and pressed her hand to the crate where the folio lay. She smiled, tired and fierce. Went clean, she breathed. Sent 2. 1 to Major Carter, 1 blind to the department's public office with the key shifted. If one don't make it, the other might. Good, Ezra said, and in that good lived all the hope he'd let himself feel. Dawn smudged the east with ash and milk. Thorne's patience burned out right about the time the light was meanest. He lifted a hand. Horns blew. Men came. Rifles spoke from 3 sides. A triangle of logic meant to reduce the hoist house to a problem that could be solved with arithmetic and death. Ezra's shoulder lit with fresh fire when the kick drove into Old Bruce. Keturah bled a little line under her ear where a splinter kissed her skin and called it love. They fell back step by step, sending in the ledger entries they could afford. A trooper made the door and fell on the threshold, boots knocking a loose board that rattled like dice in a cup. Then, as if God remembered he had some say out here, The lower trail thundered with horses coming fast. Ezra flashed to the office window and saw real cavalry. Uniforms sweat sour and torn at elbows. Horses lathery with a night's run, guidon tattered to honest rags. A young lieutenant at their head, jaw set, eyes bright, threw up a hand. "Hold your fire," he shouted, astonishment riding his voice. By what authority are federal soldiers engaged on federal soldiers? Thorne spun, mask slipping. "You're out of your jurisdiction, Lieutenant." "That right," the boy called. "I rode here on orders signed by Major Elias Carter. Got a cipher telegram saying a Captain Thorne's been playing treason with the nation's purse." Silence bucked under the sun. Ezra looked to Keturah. She looked to the folio. The folio lay as calm as a stone at the bottom of a good well. Thorne's jaw flexed. "Lieutenant," he said carefully, "you do not understand the layers." "I don't need layers," the boy cut in. "I need the truth. And the truth generally don't carry guards." Boone panicked first. Men like him can smell a change in wind, and they choke on it. He fired wild at the hoist house, then turned the gun to the newcomers. The lieutenant answered with one clean shot, center mass. Boone folded as neat as a shirt on wash day. He hit the ground with his civilized cravat, turned the dark color that don't wash out. Somewhere near the office threshold, a trooper tore for the folio, a last idiot reaching for the last wrong thing. Keturah came off the crate like a hawk strikes. He never saw the butt of the rifle that kissed him to sleep. Thorne looked around and saw the numbers were no longer his. The line he'd drawn with his men and his crimes and his winter eyes had been crossed by a younger line that still believed in maps made by law. He set his pistol down slow on the ground, like a man laying a child in a cradle after admitting the child wasn't his. Ezra didn't cheer. The West don't encourage it. He just lowered his Colt, felt his shoulder complain mightily, and met Keturah Washington's gaze in a room that smelled of old copper and new hope. "Paper," she said, touching the folio. "Then breath. Then court. Then bread," Ezra added, and the small smile they shared tasted more like the country they wanted than any flag ever flown over a bent man's back. Outside, the lieutenant sent riders on the Millfield Road to fetch a prison wagon and a telegraph confirmation. He posted guards around Thorne like a ring of saplings springing up after fire. He walked into the hoist house and saluted awkward as a boy trying on his father's suit coat. "Ma'am." "Sir, I'm Lieutenant Avery Knox. We came as fast as decent horses would let us." "Decent's the word," Ezra said. Knox nodded at the folio. "Major Carter'll want that under seal." Keturah held it a little tighter for a breath. Then she looked at Ezra, and what moved across her face was trust, the kind earned one hard inch at a time between good men and good women in bad places. "We'll carry it together," she said. "Me to tell it. Him to keep it straight." Knox's mouth quirked. "I reckon that a chain of custody they don't teach at the academy, but it'll hold." They walked into the morning with a book that had carved a gallows tree out of ledger lines. Men watched them with the kind of respect that keeps a man upright when the wind stays mean. The sky looked like somebody had decided to polish it. The telegraph wires didn't sing, not where anyone could hear, but Ezra fancied he could feel a small hum under his boots, like the world's story changing a syllable it had used too long. He helped Keturah into a saddle. His left arm fought him for the privilege and lost. She winced when the leather pulled across her shoulder where a splinter had tried to write its own name. "You all right?" he asked. "I will be," she said. Then, after a beat that held more than the sound it made, "You kept me alive when everything pointed the other way." He shook his head once. "You kept us honest when dying would have been easier." She looked at the mine, at the ridge, at the long line of law rewriting itself, one steady hoofbeat at a time. "My father used to say a ledger is just a prayer a man writes to his future. Maybe we wrote one he'd answer, wherever he is." "Maybe we did," Ezra said. They rode down toward Millfield and a court that might be crooked, but would have to work for it. And behind them the hoist house sighed in the new sun like a tired thing stretching. Coyotes set to singing from over the ridge, and the sound wasn't hunger now. It was just what a morning sounds like when it survives the night. Somewhere, miles of wire away, A clerk tapped a key with more care than he'd used yesterday. Somewhere, a judge packed a bag with more fear than he'd tasted in years. Somewhere, 1,000 little lies woke up and found their feet cold. The West rolled out ahead, bare as a cheap table and just as honest. Ezra breathed dust and bread crust and hot iron and something else. Hope. Maybe, but the grown kind, the sort that knows better and stands up anyway. He touched 2 fingers to the brim of his hat, not to the flag in his mind, but to the woman at his side who held a book that could hang men without tying a single knot. "Come on, Miss Washington," he said. "Let's go tell the truth where it don't want to be heard." They went.